Thank you. Thank you to the Reporters Committee and David Boardman. It should give us all so much comfort that one of the great editors is now teaching the next generation of journalists. It's a cliche to say that no one deserves any award alone, but it is particularly hard not to feel that way when you rise from tables that include some of the finest journalists of a generation. So Joe Kahn and Matt Purdy and my other partners at the Times, thank you for being colleagues and friends. It is particularly hard not to feel that way when you work for a couple of publishers who have chosen to maintain their paper's size, force, and greatness rather than to join the ranks of the nation's richest families. So thank you, Arthur and AG, particularly Arthur, who has pulled off the amazing feat of leaving behind a news organization that is even bigger and better than the one he inherited. And there's no way to feel totally deserving when you've worked for and with the greatest mentors of all time. So thank you, Joe Lelyveld and the late John Carroll, each of whom in their own way taught me that newsiness and aggressiveness could easily be combined with humanity. I'd like to thank Dylan Landis for inexplicably telling a rather rough-hewn 25-year-old reporter that he was one day going to be editor of the New York Times. And I'm a product of local newspapers, a group that has endangered the greatest crisis in journalism today. So thank you to the States Item and the Times-Picayune of New Orleans, which embraced a green college dropout and taught him to dictate on deadline, and that reporting meant floating empathetically back and forth among victims, killers, and police to ultimately get to the truth. And finally, thank you to the late Edward Baquet and Myrtle Romano, who grew up in the segregated South with scant education and somehow, incredibly, pushed their children to succeed beyond their most vivid imaginations. Our president may not like or understand what we do. In fact, it is in his interest to undermine us since we cast ourselves as independent institutions who desperately and competitively want to know the truth. Institutions that day in and day out are asking the hard questions that he may not want to answer. But we move ahead, protecting the principle that inquiry and reporting are what matters most to us, that in an age where certainty and snark sometimes pass for journalism, absolutely nothing is more important to us than the joyful and serious pursuit of the deepest knowledge and understanding. Thank you.